Hi, I'm Kathleen Staton with Ars Lyrica, and I'm here today with Matthew Dirst, Artistic Director. How are you, Matthew?
Just fine. How are you, Kathleen?
Wonderful. I'm so excited to be talking to you today about this monumental project of recording the entire Well-Tempered Clavier in honor of the 300th anniversary of its writing. How are you feeling about this?
Very excited. It was great to be able to record the first group of 8 Preludes and Fugues in May, and I'm looking forward very much to the next group of 8 in October. I'm very grateful that we were able to split this up into 3 different sections because doing it all at once would be a little daunting. This is very fussy music, and it's hard to get things right the first time around, to be honest, especially on an instrument where the keys are rather narrow and short, and it's a little perilous. But the sound is wonderful. The environment is ideal at Rienzi for this kind of work. So yeah, it's a dream project for me.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, of course, each one of the preludes and fugues are in a different key. Do they have enough individual, unique character to make them like a character piece, meaning that the preparation, interpretation, and learning of them is separate from others, or does it all sort of run together?
No, they are all individual creations. I think it was Schumann in the 19th century who said that these pieces, he was referring to the WTC Preludes, are character pieces of the highest art. And he should know he wrote a lot of character pieces for piano. Of course, we didn't really call keyboard pieces character pieces much in the 18th century, at least not with German composers. The French did, but the Germans didn't. And with these preludes and fugues of Bach, yeah, I would say that the preludes especially are oftentimes very distinct from each other. The fugues, because they all follow essentially the same kind of procedures, that is to say imitative counterpoint, they have certain similarities about them, but they all have very distinctive subjects and ways of going about their business. Some of them more complicated than others, some of them trickier to play than others, and sometimes that's not a factor of, say, voicing. I find, for example, the 3-part fugues, the fugues with 3 voices, to be somewhat more challenging than the 4-voice and the 5-voice fugues, just because you constantly have to struggle with a middle voice that's divided somehow between the hands. And Bach tends to write in very active textures, and so you're trying to create a line essentially with 2 thumbs in the middle of the keyboard that hops around a lot. So those are the challenges.
Speaking of challenges, I started a master's, which I abandoned in favor of an artist diploma. But one of the reasons was because of a Bach class. And we were meant to learn by subject all of the well-tempered clavier and then be able to do drop the needle. And obviously there's merit to that because then you can identify what you're listening for. But to me, it destroyed so much of the enjoyment of taking in the whole thing.
Yeah, were you doing both books, all 48?
It was a big project. Yes, I think we were meant to start with the first and then the second, but it turned something beautiful into something so analytical that it almost destroyed the music for me. And then, of course, as the professor was trying to be quite tricky, it wasn't exactly a clear statement of each one of those.
Yeah, that would not be my ideal way of appreciating it either.
But it makes me also think of Wagner in like the leitmotif kind of way, right? So if you try and eat Wagner, or if you try and take in Wagner, it's like, how do you eat an elephant, right? You eat it one bite at a time, not the whole elephant. But if you go to a ring cycle or any kind of marathon performance like that, it is as much about the whole experience as it is about the micro things. And I think having some of that micro awareness can help you along with your enjoyment. So all of that together to say, would you suggest that the listeners prepare in any way by, if they're interested, of course, in this, by knowing some of those fugue subjects?
Well, if you happen to have the Well-Tempered Clavier on your bookshelf, a score of it, by all means, or if you want to download it from IMSLP or one of the other websites where it's available for free, absolutely do so. I think always appreciating music that's this contrapuntal and in a sense cerebral is better with the score in front of you. That's how Bach, I think, intended it to be appreciated by players principally, who wrestle with its peculiarities and who figure out, oh, there's a voice here that I never noticed before. And I've been playing this piece for 40 years. I mean, those are the kinds of pleasures really of playing Bach repeatedly that happen to those of us who traffic in the music a lot. That's why I think just memorizing fugue subjects is kind of beside the point. It's not so much the fugue subject, but what he does with it that's worth noticing.
right, its relationship to everything else around
Yeah,
it. And therein
exactly.
lies the genius. I
Yep.
love this idea that they were never intended. They were, of course, intended for study and for practice, correct?
Yeah, I mean, he says in the preface on the title page, really, of the Well-Tempered Clavier, that these pieces are dedicated, as he puts it, to youth desirous of learning, and to those already skilled in the study. So that really means keyboard players, principally, who want to sit down with the volume and play through things, maybe on a daily basis, maybe on a weekly basis. It gives you certainly plenty to think about. This was pedagogical music, really, of the highest order.
Very interesting. So the likelihood that this would have been performed would have only been literally among friends or fellow keyboard players, most likely.
Yeah, I don't know of a single performance really of either book until at least the 20th century. I don't think it would have been really conceivable even for the great pianists of the 19th century, who did play it for each other. Schumann certainly did, Mendelssohn, even Wagner. I mean, Cosima writes in her diaries about playing WTC preludes and fugues for each other at Wanfried. So you know that they experienced this kind of music in small groups and in private, but the notion of putting the whole book on a program didn't occur to anybody, I think, before the 20th century.
I think we have our new sort of scholars circle for Ars Lyrica. You can, of course, join Opera Circle and support opera, but we should definitely have a Bach circle where we can truly appreciate some of these works.
Why not? The
Yeah.
American Bach Society could always use more membership.
What else do you find really singular about these pieces? I mean, is this something that for you is an artistic waypoint that check, you've done this, you've learned them all and you've played them in a season kind of thing, or is it more ethereal than that?
It's not so much a check mark. For me, it's just a really great way to spend time. I mean, this started my engagement recently with this volume. Not just because of the anniversary, that's kind of a good excuse, but it was really the pandemic that did it, plus the arrival of a new harpsichord in my life that's meant to play precisely this kind of music. It's a German style instrument from one of the leading builders. And this music comes alive on it in a really particular way that's unique to that instrument. In my humble estimation, it works so much better than, say, on my French double or on an Italian instrument. Or any other kind of harpsichord. So it was partly those two things. The pandemic gave me more time at home to practice, and a new instrument that's here in the house enabled hours and hours of just reading through and contemplating this music and getting some of it back in my fingers, learning others that I'd never learned before, and reminding myself of why this music is so important, really, in the grand scheme of things, for somebody like myself and for a lot of other keyboard players. And why it's worth coming back to.
I wanted to come back and touch a little bit on the idea of the harpsichord being specifically suited for kinds of repertoire. So those of our watchers who know that there's a difference between a French and a German harpsichord, okay. But for our listeners, novice listeners too, as well as experienced, tell us more about how that particular harpsichord is so suited to Bach and what it allows you to do, and maybe what we might hear it be able to do.
Well, it's modeled after the work of the Grebner family from Dresden from the early 18th century. These are instrument builders. They built organs and harpsichords and fortepianos. They're builders that Bach himself knew and was well acquainted with. A couple of their instruments survive. They're both double manual instruments and are in museums in Germany. The builder I work with, John Phillips in Berkeley, California, has been making double manual Grebners for about 20 years now. So he got rather good at it. And he likes this model for a lot of reasons, partly because of the elegance of its construction, but also because it has a peculiar sound that's distinct from, say, the Mietke builder, the Mietke instruments that survive from Berlin, or the other German instruments from the 17th and 18th centuries. We think it's probably a little bit closer to the sound ideal that Bach had in mind, just because of geographic closeness. It's stringing, that is to say, the particular way in which it's strung with particular gauges and types of strings, plus the dimensions of the instrument, make it a really great vehicle for counterpoint, especially, which is to say the confluence of various active lines all in the middle of the keyboard all at once. When you play this kind of music on, say, a French harpsichord that's designed to have a big bloom to the sound, oftentimes the busy contrapuntal lines in the middle get a little bit obscured and you can't really separate out the individual lines. German instruments are much more oriented towards this kind of polyphonic music. And so the music comes alive in a very special way on them.
That's fascinating. So nothing gets lost in the resonance or in the shuffle, so to speak.
Exactly. And you can kind of hear occasionally intimations of instruments. For example, the bass on the instrument that I have been playing always reminds me a little bit of a bassoon, because it's got that very kind of pointed and very focused sound. Unlike,
articulation,
say,
even, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Which harpsichord do you most often use when you're working from the stage, or does it vary because of the repertoire?
Oh, it varies depending on the program, and sometimes on the logistics. Do I want to take a harpsichord from the university for this program, from the church, or from the house? Luckily, I've got access to lots of really fine instruments, and so it really depends on the program and the needs of it, and whether I'm needing to stand and play or sit and play with the lid open. It's a variety of factors.
So while we're on the topic of Bach, Matthew, why don't you update us on the progress of the book that you've been putting together?
Yes, over the last couple of years, I've been working on a book for a new series that Oxford University Press is putting out. These are intended to be guides to the Bach repertoire, and my book is on both the Art of Fugue and the Musical Offering, two late learned collections from the last years of Bach's life that, like the Well-Tempered Clavier, are a little bit maybe off the beaten path. These are not pieces that you hear very often in concert, and there's a good reason for that. It's rather introspective music, not to say esoteric, but it's quite contrapuntal in nature. That is to say, There's a lot of busy active lines, some of which, the canons, for example, are a little bit odd sounding. The contrapunti or the fugues in the art of fugue are better known, perhaps, and the sonata in a musical offering are perhaps the best known pieces in these collections, but they've never been treated before in a single book in English. And this gave me a chance to essentially write in a vein of music criticism, because I'm essentially discussing the music, its reception, what people have done with it over time, without necessarily getting too technical. These books are to be marketed towards a general audience, that is to say, to Bach lovers in general, as well as to students, to fellow scholars. But it's not a scholarly monograph with a sophisticated academic apparatus. Quite the contrary. There's no footnotes, which was a great feeling of liberation, actually, in writing it. Instead, a bibliography of further reading, should readers be so inclined. A few musical examples to kind of guide the trip through both collections, and a lot of reflections, really, on how the music works and what it all might mean.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. And you said that this is ready for submission.
Uh, yes, I'll be sending it off hopefully in the next week. I'm just making some last edits.
That's truly exciting for Bach lovers everywhere and students alike.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's gotten to this stage. The pandemic once again provided some free time that I otherwise wouldn't have had to knock out major portions of the manuscript, and I had a leave from the university for a year to work on it as well, so that enabled a kind of jumpstart.
That's incredible. You've made so much progress artistically, as an author, and musically over this time when we've felt rather challenged to be home.
Yeah, indeed. I'm counting my lucky stars that we were fine here, at least domestically. It just meant that Sixto and I could basically stay home and do our work.
Very fortunate indeed.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a great start off for the Ars Lyrica season, and we look very much forward to hearing these performances at the Rienzi in October and again later in 2022. Matthew, thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.